Los Angeles, the city of angels, the dream factory, the place where everyone comes to become someone else. After 25 years with the LAPD, I can tell you the real truth. This city doesn't make dreams come true. It feeds on them. And sometimes, when the feeding gets too intense, people die in ways that never make it to the tabloids. If you're watching this from LA, drop your neighborhood in the comments. Hollywood, Silver Lake, Venice, doesn't matter. Every part of this city has its ghosts. Every studio lot, every abandoned building, every mansion in the hills. They're all haunted by what could have been, what should have been, what never should have existed. My name is Detective Ray Vasquez, LAPD homicide, and in October 2022, I investigated a series of murders that the department still won't acknowledge. Streaming service employees dying while watching content that didn't exist. Films that weren't in any database. Shows that consumed their viewers from the inside out. They called it mass hysteria, workplace stress. But I know what I saw. I know what's still out there, streaming in the spaces between channels, waiting for someone to press play. October in Los Angeles is when the city shows its true face. The Santa Ana winds blow in from the desert, hot and dry, making everyone irritable and strange. The sky turns that particular shade of apocalyptic orange that photographers love and residents fear. It's fire season, earthquake weather, the time when the city feels most like it's balanced on the edge of something catastrophic. I was sitting in my office at the police administration building downtown, going through cold cases, when my partner, Detective Lisa Chen, walked in with a look I'd learned to recognize over our 5 years working together, the look that said we'd caught something weird. "Ray, we've got a body at Netflix headquarters in Hollywood, but this one's..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Different." Different how? The Vic was found in a screening room, been dead for maybe 6 hours. But Ray, the security footage shows him going in there 3 days ago, and never leaving. I looked up from my files. "That's impossible. Someone would have noticed." "That's what I said. But the security guards swear no one's been in that screening room for the past week. It's been locked, marked for renovation, except our victim is very much in there, very much dead, and according to his keycard data, he's been watching something on repeat for 72 hours straight." The drive from downtown to the Netflix building on Sunset Boulevard took 20 minutes in traffic, giving me time to review what we knew. The victim was Marcus Thompson, 28, a content acquisition specialist, basically someone who watched submissions and decided what Netflix should buy. Model employee, no problems. Engaged to be married next month. The Netflix building was one of those modern glass and steel structures that tried too hard to look creative and fun. Giant screens in the lobby played previews of their latest shows, and employees walked around in expensive casual wear, all trying to project that perfect blend of artistic and corporate. The head of security, a former LAPD officer named Mike Brennan, met us at the elevator. "Detective Vasquez, Detective Chen, I've got to tell you, I've seen some weird stuff in 20 years of security work, but this..." He shook his head. "We've kept the room sealed since we found him." He led us to the 3rd floor, to a hallway lined with screening rooms. Room 7 had yellow tape across the door. Brennan unlocked it and we stepped inside. The smell hit first. Not decomposition exactly, but something else. Ozone and burnt plastic, with an undertone of something organic and wrong. The room was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a large screen on one wall and a single row of theater seats facing it. Marcus Thompson was in the center seat. He was sitting upright, eyes open, staring at the blank screen. His hands were on the armrests, fingers curved like he was gripping them, but rigor mortis had set in, making him look like a grotesque mannequin. His expression was what got me, not fear or pain, but something like rapture, like he'd seen something so beautiful or terrible that it had frozen him in a moment of pure awe. "Jesus," Lisa muttered, pulling on latex gloves. What happened to his eyes? I looked closer and felt my stomach turn. Marcus's eyes weren't reflecting light properly. They were matte, like all the moisture had been drawn out of them. But more than that, there were patterns in the irises, geometric shapes that definitely hadn't been there naturally, like someone had etched fractals into his eyes from the inside. "What was he watching?" I asked Brennan. "That's the thing. Nothing. The system shows this room's player hasn't been used in 2 weeks. It's not even connected right now. We disconnected it for the renovation." I looked at the blank screen, then at Marcus's fixed stare. "So he sat here for 3 days watching nothing?" "According to the logs, yeah, but Detective..." Brennan hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I took a photo when we first found him before you got here. Look at the screen." He showed me the photo. The screen wasn't blank. It showed static, but not normal static. There were patterns in it, shapes that almost resolved into images before dissolving again. And in the center, barely visible, was what looked like a figure. Tall, thin, wearing what might have been a suit from the 1920s. "But when I looked again," Brennan continued, "the screen was blank. The photo is the only proof I have that anything was there." Lisa was examining the player beneath the screen. "This is weird. The player isn't just disconnected. It's been modified. There are components here I don't recognize. They look almost organic." I crouched beside her. She was right. Mixed in with the normal circuitry were what looked like veins or root systems, dark and pulsing faintly. They seemed to be growing out of the machine, spreading along the floor in thin tendrils that disappeared into the walls. "We need to evacuate this floor," I said. "Get forensics in here, but in hazmat gear. And nobody, absolutely nobody, turns on any screen in this building until we figure out what's going on." As we sealed the room and began evacuating employees, my phone rang. It was Captain Martinez from downtown. "Vasquez, I don't know what you've stumbled into, but I just got a call from Amazon Studios in Culver City. They've got a body in exactly the same condition. Screening room, dead for hours, but logged as being there for days, watching something that doesn't exist. Same cause of death?" "That's the thing. The coroner can't determine a cause of death. The victims just stopped, like someone hit pause on their entire biological system." By the end of the day, we had 5 bodies across Los Angeles. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Apple TV Plus, and Paramount Plus. All content acquisition specialists. All found in screening rooms. All with those same fractal patterns etched in their eyes. All watching something that didn't exist on machines that weren't supposed to be working. Lisa and I set up a command center at PAB, trying to find connections between the victims. They didn't know each other, had never worked together, but they had all attended the same event, a film festival in downtown LA 2 weeks ago. The Los Angeles Film Festival, dedicated to showcasing forgotten and suppressed cinema from Hollywood's hidden history. "That's our connection," Lisa said, pulling up the festival's website. "Look at this. They claim to have discovered a cache of lost films from the 1920s, stuff that was supposedly destroyed in the Great Studio Fires." The website was bizarre. The design looked modern, but felt old, like someone had tried to recreate the aesthetic of a 1920s movie poster using current web technology. The films they'd showcased had names I'd never heard of. The Silver Scream, Shadows on Sunset, The Final Take, Studio 13. "Who organized this festival?" I asked. Lisa clicked through to the About page, and we both froze. The organizer was listed as one William Whitmore, veteran filmmaker and preservationist. The photo showed a thin man in an old-fashioned suit standing in front of what looked like the Hollywood sign, except the sign in the photo said Hollywoodland, which meant it was from before 1949, but the festival had happened 2 weeks ago. "This has to be a reproduction photo," Lisa said, but her voice was uncertain. I called the venue where the festival had been held, an old theater on Broadway that had been closed for renovations. The manager answered on the third ring. "The Los Angeles Film Festival? Never heard of it. This theater's been closed for 6 months. Nobody's been in here except construction workers. But when we pulled the city permits, there it was. A 1-week permit for the Los Angeles Film Festival, signed and approved. The signature on the permit was impossible to read, just a series of loops that hurt to look at too long. That night, I went home to my apartment in Los Feliz, trying to make sense of what we'd found. 5 dead streaming service employees, a film festival that did and didn't happen, lost films from the 1920s, and those patterns in the victim's eyes, fractals that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. I was going through the festival website again when I noticed something. Each of the films they'd showcased had a trailer. I clicked on one, The Silver Scream. The video player loaded, but instead of a play button, there was just static. The same kind of static Brennan had photographed in the Netflix screening room. And in that static, I could almost see something. Shapes, figures, a story trying to tell itself. I leaned closer to my laptop screen, trying to make out what was in the static. The patterns were hypnotic, pulling me in. I could almost hear something now. Music, maybe, or voices, distant and distorted. The static began to clear, and I saw a figure in a 1920s suit standing in what looked like an old Hollywood studio. He turned toward the camera, and his face. My phone rang, snapping me out of it. I blinked, disoriented. According to my laptop clock, 3 hours had passed. 3 hours I couldn't remember, just staring at static. It was Lisa. "Ray, we've got another body, but this one's different. This one's still alive." The victim was Jennifer Park, a development executive at Disney+. She'd been found in her office, sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen. Like the others, she'd been there for days according to the logs, but nobody had noticed. She was catatonic, unresponsive, but her vital signs were stable. What made her different was that she was still watching. On her screen was static, but when we looked at it through phone cameras or any digital recording device, we could see what she was seeing. It was a film, black and white, silent, and it was impossible. The film showed modern Los Angeles, the current skyline, contemporary cars, people in current fashion. But it was all in the style of a 1920s silent film, complete with title cards and orchestral accompaniment that somehow played despite being a silent film. And throughout it, weaving between the scenes, was that same figure in the old suit. "My God," Lisa whispered, recording the screen with her phone. "It's showing the city now, but as if it existed then, or showing then as if it's now. I can't tell which." As we watched, a title card appeared. The Final Cut, a William Whitmore production, filmed in Hollywoodland, 1923-2023. Both dates. Impossible. Another title card, starring you. And then we saw ourselves, on the screen, in the film. Lisa and I, dressed in 1920s clothing, investigating a murder in a Hollywood that was both old and new, both then and now. We watched ourselves discover bodies, follow clues, all in the jerky, sped-up motion of a silent film. But we weren't acting. These were our actual movements from the past few days, somehow translated into this impossible film format. Everything we'd done since finding Marcus Thompson's body was there, rendered in silver nitrate and shadows. "Turn it off," I said, reaching for the computer. "Wait," Lisa grabbed my arm. "Look." On the screen, our film selves had found something we hadn't found yet. They were in a basement somewhere, looking at rows of film canisters. The title card read, "The truth lies beneath the dream factory." Another card, Studio 13. And then Jennifer Park screamed. Not a normal scream, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than her throat, older than her body. Her eyes snapped open, and they had the same fractal patterns as the dead victims. But she was looking at us, seeing us, and when she spoke, Her voice was not her own. "He's still filming," she said in a voice that sounded like it was coming through an old gramophone. "William Whitmore never stopped filming. He's been filming Los Angeles for 100 years, capturing every moment, every dream, every nightmare, and now he's ready for the final cut." "Where is Studio 13? I demanded. Jennifer Park smiled with a mouth that had too many teeth. "Where it's always been, where it never was. Beneath the Hollywood sign, beneath Hollywoodland, in the space between frames, where the silver screen meets the silver scream." She laughed, that gramophone voice getting more distorted, and then her computer exploded. Not violently. It just came apart, every component separating and floating for a moment before clattering to the floor. In the debris, those same organic veins we'd seen at Netflix were growing, spreading across the floor like a film reel unspooling. Jennifer Park was unconscious again, but alive. The fractal patterns in her eyes were moving, showing scenes from films that never existed, stories that were never told, or perhaps stories that were told too well and had to be hidden. As paramedics took her away, Lisa and I stood in the ruined office, looking at the spreading veins of organic circuitry. "Studio 13, Lisa said quietly. "That's where this started." "And that's where we need to go," I replied, though every instinct told me it was a trap. But trap or not, people were dying. And somewhere in Los Angeles, in a studio that existed in 1923 and 2023 simultaneously, William Whitmore was still filming, still capturing the city's dreams and nightmares, still preparing for his final cut. Finding Studio 13 should have been simple. Los Angeles keeps meticulous records of every building, every permit, every square foot of developed land. But when Lisa and I started searching, we hit wall after wall of contradictions. According to city records, there had never been a Studio 13. According to Hollywood historians, it had always existed. According to old maps, it was everywhere and nowhere. We started with the obvious, the area around the Hollywood sign. The sign itself sat on Mount Lee in Griffith Park, tourist accessible but heavily monitored. But Whitmore's film had said, "Beneath Hollywoodland," and that opened up possibilities. The original sign from 1923 had been longer, spelling out Hollywoodland to advertise a housing development. The land portion was removed in 1949. "What if beneath doesn't mean underground?" Lisa suggested as we drove up the winding roads toward the sign. "What if it means something else? Beneath the surface, beneath perception?" It was 3 a.m., the only time we could investigate without dealing with tourists or park rangers. The city spread out below us like a circuit board, millions of lights creating their own constellations. The Santa Ana winds were still blowing, making the air feel electric, charged with possibility and danger. We parked at the Griffith Observatory and hiked toward the sign. Technically, we were trespassing, but our badges would cover us if anyone asked. The trail was dark, our flashlights creating dancing shadows among the chaparral and twisted oak trees. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote, seemed amplified in the darkness. As we got closer to the sign, I noticed something odd. My phone was glitching, the screen flickering between different displays. One moment it showed 2022, the next 1923. The GPS couldn't lock onto our position, the blue dot jumping randomly across the map. "You feel that?" Lisa asked, and I realized what she meant. The air was different here, thicker. It felt like walking through invisible curtains, each step taking us through another layer of something. We reached the access road behind the sign, and that's when we saw it. Not a building, but a distortion. A place where the light bent wrong, where the landscape didn't quite match up. It was like looking at a badly edited film where two scenes were spliced together incorrectly. "There," Lisa pointed, "between the H and O. Do you see it?" I did. A gap that shouldn't exist, a space between the letters that was both inches and miles wide. As we approached, the distortion became more pronounced. I could see through it to another version of the same hillside, but different, older. The vegetation was different, the topography altered. And there, in that other version, was a building. Studio 13 was a modest structure by Hollywood standards, a single-story building that looked like it had been built in the 1920s and abandoned shortly after. Art Deco architecture partially reclaimed by nature, walls covered in vines that looked both dead and alive. A sign above the entrance, barely legible, read, "Whitmore Productions, Studio 13, the future of cinema." "How do we get to it?" Lisa asked. I reached toward the distortion and my hand passed through. But it felt wrong, like pushing through cold honey that sparked with electricity. I could feel both versions of the hillside simultaneously, the now and the then occupying the same space. "Together," I said, taking Lisa's hand. "On 3. We stepped through. The sensation was indescribable. Every nerve in my body fired at once, sending contradictory signals. I was falling and standing still, freezing and burning, existing and not existing. For a moment that lasted forever and no time at all, I could see all of Los Angeles. Every version of it, from the Tongva villages to the Spanish missions to the modern metropolis, all superimposed on each other like a multiple exposure photograph. Then we were through, standing in front of Studio 13. The air here was different. It had a quality to it, like the atmosphere in old films, slightly grainy, slightly silver. The sounds of modern LA were gone, replaced by a distant music, orchestral, tinny, like a soundtrack played on degrading equipment. "Our phones are dead," Lisa noted, checking her device. Not powered off. Dead, like they'd never worked at all. The door to Studio 13 was open. Not ajar, but purposefully open, inviting. Inside, we could see the flicker of light, like a projector running. We entered, weapons drawn but feeling useless. What good were guns against something that existed in multiple times simultaneously? The interior was a single large room, filled with film equipment that spanned a century. Hand-cranked cameras from the 1920s sat next to digital rigs from the 2020s. Film canisters were stacked everywhere, labeled with dates that hadn't happened yet and dates that were impossibly old. The walls were covered in screens, not mounted but somehow part of the walls themselves, showing different scenes from Los Angeles's history all playing simultaneously. And in the center of it all, behind an editing desk that looked like it was made from multiple decades of technology fused together, sat William Whitmore. He was exactly as he'd appeared in the photograph, thin, gaunt, wearing a suit that was both brand new and a century old. When he turned to us, his face was wrong, not deformed, but existing in too many moments at once. I could see him young and old, alive and dead, all superimposed on each other. "Detectives," he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You're just in time for the screening." "You're under arrest for murder," I said, though the words felt absurd even as I spoke them. Whitmore laughed, a sound like film running through a projector. "Murder? I've never killed anyone, Detective Vasquez. I've simply shown them the truth. The truth about this city, about the dreams it sells and the nightmares it creates. 5 people are dead. Dead, or transformed." He gestured to the screens around us. "Look closer." I did, and I saw them. Marcus Thompson, the Netflix victim, was in one screen, but he was dressed in 1920s clothing, acting in a silent film. The Amazon victim was in another, directing a movie that looked both ancient and futuristic. All 5 victims were there, in the screens, part of films that were playing on endless loops. "They saw what Los Angeles really is," Whitmore continued. "Not a city, but a story. A narrative that's been running since before the first camera rolled, and will continue long after the last screen goes dark, They chose to become part of that story. They didn't choose anything, Lisa said. You killed them. I offered them immortality. Whitmore stood, and his movement was stop motion, jerky, like frames were missing. Do you know what Hollywood really is? It's a machine for capturing souls. Every film, every show, every piece of content, it's all part of the same story. The story of human dreams and desires, captured in silver and light. He moved to one of the old cameras, caressing it like a lover. I discovered it in 1923. The real power of cinema. Not just to record reality, but to create it. To exist in the space between frames, where anything is possible. You're insane, I said. Am I? He turned to us, and for a moment, his face stabilized into a single timeline. He looked tired, ancient, desperate. I've been filming Los Angeles for 100 years. Every moment, every person, every dream and nightmare. And do you know what I've learned? The city itself is alive. It feeds on dreams, on the stories people tell themselves about who they're going to become. And I've been documenting its feeding. He gestured to the film canisters. Every person who's ever come to LA to make it big, to become someone, to live their dream, they're all here. Their stories, their essence, captured forever. The successful ones, the failures, the forgotten ones, all part of the grand narrative. And the streaming services? Lisa asked. The evolution of the medium, film, television, streaming, it's all the same hunger, the same feeding, but the digital age made it possible to do what I'd only dreamed of in 1923, to make the audience part of the show, to literally consume the viewers. He walked to his editing desk, hands moving over equipment that shouldn't work together. Analog and digital, past and future. The films I showed at the festival, they were tests. Seeing who was receptive, who could see beyond the veil of normal reality. Your victims, they saw the truth. They saw that every piece of content is connected, part of a larger organism that feeds on human attention, human emotion, human dreams. That's why they died watching nothing, I realized. They weren't watching nothing. They were seeing everything. The entire history of Los Angeles media, all at once. Precisely! Whitmore clapped, the sound echoing wrong. They saw the final cut. The ultimate edit of everything that's ever been filmed in this city. Every movie, every show, every home video, every security camera, every phone recording, all edited together into one infinite story. The story of Los Angeles itself. And Studio 13 exists in the space between frames, between 1/24th of a second, the gap where persistence of vision creates the illusion of movement. I built it there, in that gap, expanding it into a pocket of space-time where all of Hollywood's history exists simultaneously. Lisa had been slowly moving around the room, and I saw her notice something. One of the film canisters was labeled with today's date, and tomorrow's, and the next day's. You're still filming, she said. You're filming things that haven't happened yet. Whitmore smiled, proud like a teacher whose student had finally understood. Time is just another dimension to edit. Once you exist between frames, you can see all the frames at once. Past, present, future. It's all just footage to be arranged. He pulled out the canister Lisa had noticed. Would you like to see how your investigation ends? Before we could answer, he was threading the film into a projector that looked like it was made from crystallized light. The wall in front of us became a screen, and the film began to play. We watched ourselves, but not as we were. In the film, Lisa and I were investigating more deaths, dozens, then hundreds. Streaming service employees, then television workers, then film crews. All of Los Angeles's entertainment industry consumed by their own medium. The city itself began to change, buildings flickering between different time periods, streets rearranging themselves like scenes being edited. And through it all, Whitmore kept filming, documenting the collapse of the barrier between fiction and reality. "This is what happens next," he said. "Unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless you become part of the solution instead of the problem." He turned to us, and his eyes were portals to other times. "Join me. Become editors of reality. Help me craft the final cut, the ultimate story of Los Angeles. Or watch as the city consumes itself, as the boundary between screen and reality completely dissolves." "There's a third option," I said, pulling out my gun. Whitmore laughed. "You can't kill someone who exists in multiple time frames, Detective. I'm already dead in 1923. I'm still being born in 2023. I exist in every frame of film ever shot in Los Angeles." But Lisa had a different idea. She wasn't aiming at Whitmore. She was aiming at the film canisters. "What happens if we destroy the films?" For the first time, Whitmore looked afraid. "You don't understand. Those aren't just films. They're reality itself, captured and stored. Destroy them, and you destroy those moments, those people, those possibilities." "Or we free them," Lisa said, and fired. The first canister exploded in a shower of silver light. The screens around us flickered, showing moments being unleashed, people who'd been trapped in frames suddenly existing again, blinking in confusion on Los Angeles streets across 100 years. "No!" Whitmore lunged for us, but his movement was constrained by his existence in multiple time frames. He flickered, jumped, existed in 5 places at once, but none of them could quite reach us. I joined Lisa, shooting canister after canister. Each one that exploded released more captured moments, more trapped souls. The walls of Studio 13 began to shake, the boundary between the pocket dimension and reality starting to collapse. "You're destroying everything!" Whitmore screamed, his form becoming more unstable. "The entire history of Los Angeles, every dream, every story." "We're setting them free," I said, grabbing an armful of canisters and throwing them into the flickering projector. The explosion was silent but blinding. Light poured out of the projector, not regular light, but the light of pure possibility. Every film that had never been made, every story that had never been told, every dream that had died in Los Angeles, all of it released at once. Whitmore screamed, a sound like a film reel breaking, and then he was gone. Not dead, but dispersed, spread across every frame of film in existence, unable to coalesce into a single being. Studio 13 was collapsing, the pocket dimension folding in on itself. Lisa grabbed my hand, and we ran for the door. Behind us, a century of captured moments was being released, reality and fiction mixing and then separating like oil and water finding their proper levels. We burst through the distortion between the Hollywood sign letters just as Studio 13 imploded. The shockwave knocked us to the ground, and for a moment, I could see all of Los Angeles flickering, uncertain, as if the city itself was trying to remember what was real and what was filmed. Then everything stabilized. The sign was just a sign. The hillside was just a hillside, and Studio 13 was gone, leaving only a patch of ground that looked like it had been scorched by light. Our phones suddenly worked again, flooding with messages and missed calls. Hours had passed, though it had felt like minutes. The streaming service victims, the ones who died, were being reported as found, alive but with no memory of the past few days. They'd simply appeared in their homes, confused but unharmed. The only evidence of what had happened was Jennifer Park, still in the hospital, still catatonic. But the fractal patterns in her eyes were fading, replaced by normal human irises. She was coming back to herself, slowly. The official report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. Gas leak at multiple streaming service buildings causing hallucinations. Mass hysteria triggered by workplace stress. The victims had never actually died. That was just a misunderstanding caused by the hallucinogenic effects. The destroyed area near the Hollywood sign was attributed to a small wildfire, quickly contained. Lisa and I knew better, but who would believe us? That a filmmaker from 1923 had been living between film frames, documenting Los Angeles for a century? That Studio 13 existed in a pocket dimension accessible through the Hollywood sign? That the entire entertainment industry was part of some vast organism that fed on human dreams? Captain Martinez called us into his office 3 days after the incident. He was a good cop, been with the LAPD for 30 years, seen the city through riots, earthquakes, and countless strange cases, but even he looked unsettled. "I've been told to tell you that none of this happened," he said, closing the door behind us. "The Department of Homeland Security apparently has a division that handles unusual incidents. They're classifying everything at a level so high I'm not even supposed to know it exists." "So we just pretend 5 people didn't die?" Lisa asked. "According to the official record, no one died. The 5 victims are all alive, back at work, with no memory of the events." Martinez paused. "But between us, off the record, what really happened up there?" I looked at Lisa, and she nodded. We told him everything. Whitmore, Studio 13, the films that captured reality, the final cut that would have merged all of Los Angeles's media history into one infinite loop. Martinez listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through disbelief, fear, and finally a tired acceptance. "You know," he said when we finished, "my grandmother used to tell me stories about old Hollywood, about how the studios had more power than anyone admitted, how they could make people disappear, not just physically but from history itself. Change the story, change reality. I always thought they were just stories." "Maybe they weren't," I said. "Maybe not." He leaned back in his chair. "The DHS team swept the area where you said Studio 13 was. They found something. Residual energy readings that don't match anything in known physics, and film fragments, pieces of film that show things that never happened or haven't happened yet." "What did they do with them?" "Sealed them in some facility in Nevada. But here's the thing. They found something else. A note addressed to you, Detective Vasquez." He handed me an evidence bag. Inside was a piece of paper that looked both brand new and century old. The handwriting was in fountain pen, elegant and precise. "The show must go on," it read. "Every story needs a sequel. W.W." William Whitmore, somehow even dispersed across every frame of film in existence, he was still conscious, still planning. That night, I went home to my apartment and tried to return to normal life. I made dinner, watched the news, tried to pretend that I hadn't seen behind the curtain of reality, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by cameras or surveillance, but by something in the space between frames, in that 1/24th of a second gap where persistence of vision creates the illusion of movement. I was getting ready for bed when my television turned on by itself. Static filled the screen, but not random static. There were patterns in it, shapes that almost resolved into images. I reached for the remote, but before I could turn it off, the static cleared. It was showing my apartment, my living room, from an angle that didn't match any possible camera position. And in the image, I could see myself, but I was dressed in clothes from the 1920s, sitting at a desk that didn't exist in my real apartment, writing in a journal. The me on the screen looked up, directly at the camera, directly at me. "You destroyed one studio," the other me said, but the voice was Whitmore's. "But there are 12 more, 13 studios for 13 stories that define Los Angeles. You found the first. Can you find the rest before they find you?" The screen went dark and my television turned off. I called Lisa immediately. "We need to meet. Now." We met at a 24-hour diner in Silver Lake, one of those places that hadn't changed since the 1950s. It felt safe somehow, locked in a specific time period instead of existing in multiple ones. "I got a visit too," Lisa said, sliding into the booth across from me. My laptop started playing a film that doesn't exist. Showed me investigating a murder that hasn't happened yet. At least, I don't think it's happened yet. 13 studios, I said. Whitmore mentioned 13 studios. Studio 13 was just one of them? Think about it. 13 major studios have dominated Hollywood at various times. If Whitmore created pocket dimensions for each one, spaces between frames where he could document and manipulate reality. Lisa pulled out her phone, started searching. The original Hollywood studios from the 1920s. There's Paramount, Universal, Warner Brothers, MGM, RKO, Fox, Columbia, but also smaller ones that people forget. Monogram, Republic, Educational Pictures. And the modern ones built on their ashes, I added. Disney, which absorbed Fox. Sony, which absorbed Columbia. Netflix, Amazon, Apple. The streaming services that are the evolution of the studio system. 13 nodes in a network, Lisa said, understanding dawning on her face. Studio 13 wasn't just documenting reality. It was one part of a larger machine, a machine for controlling the narrative of Los Angeles itself. And we only destroyed one part. We spent the next week investigating quietly, off the books. We couldn't trust the department. The DHS involvement meant someone, somewhere, knew about the studios and was either protecting them or studying them. We had to work alone. The pattern began to emerge. Each of the mysterious deaths over the past decade that had been attributed to various causes, suicide, accident, natural causes, had connections to specific locations around Los Angeles. Locations that corresponded to where the old studios had been or where the new ones were now. Paramount Studios, 3 deaths in 2019, all people who'd claimed to see ghostly figures on the lot after hours. Universal Studios, 5 deaths in 2020, all tourists who'd gotten lost in the backlot and been found days later in a catatonic state. Warner Brothers, 2 deaths in 2021, both security guards who'd reported seeing films being made in sound stages that were supposedly empty. The pattern continued. Each studio had its own cluster of mysterious deaths or disappearances, all involving people who'd seen something they shouldn't have. "It's a web," Lisa said, mapping the locations on her tablet. "And look, if you connect them in chronological order of when the studios were founded." She drew lines between the points, and a symbol emerged. 13 points forming a perfect geometric pattern centered on one location, the intersection of Hollywood and Vine. "The heart of old Hollywood," I said, "where it all began." "That's where we'll find the central node, the main screening room where all 13 studios connect." We prepared carefully. This wasn't going to be like Studio 13, where we'd stumbled in unprepared. We equipped ourselves with every piece of recording equipment we could find. Film cameras, digital cameras, phones, even an old Super 8 camera Lisa found in a pawn shop. If Whitmore existed in the spaces between frames, maybe having multiple frame rates would give us an advantage. The intersection of Hollywood and Vine at 3 a.m. was eerily quiet. The tourist shops were closed, their neon signs dark. The stars on the Walk of Fame seemed to glow faintly in the streetlight, each one a monument to dreams achieved or destroyed. "How do we find it?" Lisa asked. I remembered something Whitmore had said about existing between frames. We need to see between moments, look for the spaces where reality doesn't quite match up. We walked slowly around the intersection, filming everything with our various cameras. Through the Super 8 viewfinder, I saw it first. A building that didn't exist. It was right there, on the corner, but only visible through the camera. A magnificent Art Deco theater with a marquee that read, "The Final Cut, now showing forever." "There," I said, pointing to what looked like an empty lot to the naked eye. Lisa looked through her digital camera and gasped. I see it, but it's different through my camera. It looks more modern, like a multiplex. We compared views. Through every different camera, the building appeared differently, each one showing a different era of movie theater architecture. But they were all the same building, existing in multiple time periods simultaneously. Together, I said, remembering how we'd entered Studio 13. All cameras recording. We walked toward the building that didn't exist, pushing through layers of reality like walking through curtains of time. The sensation was familiar now, but no less disturbing. That feeling of being in multiple moments at once, of time becoming flexible and meaningless. And then we were inside. The theater was impossible. The lobby stretched in all directions, larger than the intersection that contained it. Movie posters covered the walls, but they weren't advertisements. They were windows. Each poster showed a film in progress, and I recognized the victims. Marcus Thompson, starring in a noir thriller that looked like it was from the 1940s. The Amazon victim in a science fiction epic that seemed to be from a future that hadn't happened yet. They're all here, Lisa breathed. Everyone who's ever disappeared in Hollywood. They're all starring in films that play forever. A figure emerged from the shadows. An usher in a uniform that kept shifting between different decades of style. When he spoke, his voice was an amalgamation of every movie theater employee who'd ever said the words, "Welcome to the final screening room. Mr. Whitmore has been expecting you." He led us deeper into the theater, through corridors that shouldn't exist, past screening rooms where impossible films played to audiences of people who may or may not have been real. Finally, we reached a massive auditorium, grander than any theater I'd ever seen. The screen was the size of a city block, and on it, Los Angeles itself was playing. Not a film of Los Angeles, but the actual city, every moment of it, from every angle, all simultaneously. Past, present, and future collapsed into a single, infinite movie. In the center of the auditorium, in a director's chair that looked like it was made from crystallized light and shadow, sat William Whitmore. But not the Whitmore we'd met before. This was all of him. Every version from every time frame, superimposed into a single being that hurt to look at directly. "Detectives," he said, his voice coming from the speakers, from the screen, from reality itself. "Welcome to the premiere of the final cut." "We destroyed Studio 13, I said. "We stopped you. You destroyed one projector, but the film continues to run. It's always been running, since the first person looked at Los Angeles and saw not a city but a story waiting to be told." He gestured to the screen. "Look closely. This isn't a recording. This is the city itself, transformed into narrative. Every person a character, every building a set, every moment a scene. The 13 studios were just focusing lenses, ways to capture and direct the story. But the story itself, the story is Los Angeles." I looked at the screen and saw my own life playing out, past, present, and moments I hadn't lived yet. I saw myself as a child, deciding to become a cop after watching too many police procedurals. I saw myself dying, multiple possible deaths in multiple possible futures. I saw myself in films I'd never been in, living lives I'd never lived. "This is what the city really is," Whitmore continued. "A machine for turning reality into fiction and fiction into reality. Every person who comes here becomes part of the story. Every dream adds to the narrative. Every nightmare feeds the plot." "And you control it all?" Lisa asked. "I document it. I edit it. I try to give it structure, meaning. Without me, without the 13 studios, the story would spiral out of control. Reality and fiction would completely merge. Los Angeles would become a living dream, a nightmare you can never wake from." That's what's been happening, I realized. The streaming service deaths, the disappearances, they're not your doing. They're happening because we destroyed Studio 13. We disrupted the system. Whitmore nodded, his multiple selves briefly aligning into a single sad smile. You thought you were freeing those people, but you were releasing unedited footage into reality. Stories without structure, narratives without ending. They're infecting the city, turning it into chaos. As if to prove his point, the screen showed Hollywood Boulevard. But it was wrong. Buildings were shifting between different time periods. People were aging and getting younger seemingly at random. A film shoot was happening, but the cameras were filming the crew while the actors operated the equipment. How do we fix it? Lisa asked. You can't, Whitmore said. Not without the 13 studios. They were regulators, editors, keeping the story of Los Angeles coherent. Without them, the city will eventually collapse into pure narrative chaos. Every story ever told here will happen simultaneously. Every film will become real. Every reality will become film. Unless, I could tell there was more. Unless you take my place. He stood from his chair, and for a moment he looked tired, ancient, desperate. I've been doing this for 100 years, maintaining the barrier between fiction and reality, keeping the stories contained. But I'm fragmenting, dispersing across too many time frames. I need successors. You want us to become, what? Editors of reality? Directors of the civic narrative. Guardians of the boundary between what is and what's filmed. It's not a prison, it's a responsibility. Someone has to keep the stories organized, or Los Angeles will eat itself. I looked at Lisa, saw the same realization in her eyes. We'd destroyed Studio 13 thinking we were solving the problem, but we'd only made it worse. The victims we'd saved were actually contained, their stories given structure and meaning within Whitmore's films. Released, they were narrative viruses infecting reality with uncontrolled fiction. If we say no? Lisa asked. Whitmore gestured to the screen. The chaos was spreading. I watched a news report where the anchor aged 50 years mid-sentence. A car chase where the vehicles kept changing makes and models. A building that was simultaneously under construction and abandoned. Then Los Angeles becomes what it was always meant to be. Pure story, unfiltered by reality. Every dream and nightmare made manifest. It might be beautiful. It might be terrible. It will definitely be incomprehensible. And if we say yes, then you become part of the machine. You'll exist partially in reality, partially in the spaces between frames. You'll guide the narrative, keep the stories contained, maintain the boundary. You'll be able to live normal lives, but you'll also be something more, or less, depending on how you look at it. The choice hung in the air like smog over the LA basin. Lisa and I stood in that impossible theater, watching Los Angeles tear itself apart on the giant screen, reality and fiction bleeding together like watercolors in the rain. Every second we hesitated, the chaos spread further. How much time do we have to decide? I asked Whitmore. He laughed. That sounded like film running through a projector. Time? Detective, we're in a screening room that exists between frames. Time is just another aspect ratio here. We have all the time in the world and no time at all. On the screen, I watched a news helicopter filming what should have been a routine traffic report turn into something else. The pilot was suddenly speaking in title cards, like a silent film character. The helicopter itself flickered between being a modern aircraft and a Wright brothers prototype. Below, the 405 freeway was simultaneously empty and packed with cars from every decade since the 1920s. Show us what it would be like, Lisa said suddenly. If we took your place, show us what we'd become. Whitmore gestured to the screen, and it changed. Now it showed us, but different versions. I saw myself sitting in an editing room that existed in multiple dimensions, cutting together footage from thousands of cameras across Los Angeles. But I wasn't just editing video, I was editing reality itself. Moving events from one timeline to another, ensuring that stories had beginnings, middles, and ends. Keeping the narrative coherent. Lisa's alternate self was in a writer's room that looked like it existed in every studio simultaneously. She was crafting storylines, but the stories became real as she wrote them. A crime drama she scripted played out on actual streets. A romance she penned brought real people together. A horror story she outlined. I looked away before I could see what that became. "We'd be gods," Lisa whispered. "No," Whitmore corrected. "You'd be editors. There's a difference. Gods create from nothing. Editors work with what exists, giving it shape and meaning. You wouldn't control Los Angeles. You'd guide its story, keep it from becoming an incoherent mess." "And if we refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The screen showed us that future too. Los Angeles collapsed into narrative chaos within weeks. Every story ever told in the city happened simultaneously. The dead walked Sunset Boulevard because they did in zombie films. Dinosaurs roamed Universal Studios because of Jurassic Park. The city became every version of itself at once. The noir LA of the 1940s, the beach paradise of the 1960s, the neon dystopia of Blade Runner, all superimposed on each other. And in that chaos, people went mad. Unable to distinguish between their real lives and the characters they'd played or watched, they became lost in an endless loop of stories without resolution. The city became a living screenplay with no final draft, constantly rewriting itself. 13 studios, 13 editors, Whitmore continued, each one maintaining a different aspect of the city's narrative. Paramount handles the classic stories, the established narratives. Universal manages the spectacles, the large-scale events. Warner Brothers maintains the balance between light and dark. Disney. He paused, a flicker of distaste crossing his many faces. Disney sanitizes, makes things palatable. Each studio has its role. "And Netflix? Amazon? The streaming services?" Lisa asked. "The evolution of the system. They don't just maintain stories. They personalize them. Every person in Los Angeles gets their own narrative, tailored to their viewing history, their desires, their fears. The algorithm doesn't just recommend content, it shapes reality to match preferences." I thought about the victims, how they'd all been content acquisition specialists. They saw behind the curtain. They realized what they were really doing. And the knowledge broke them, or transformed them, depending on your perspective. They became part of the content they were acquiring. "But we're different?" I asked. "We can handle it?" Whitmore studied us with his multiple eyes across multiple time frames. "You've already been handling it. Every case you've solved, every investigation you've conducted, you've been editing reality, giving structure to chaos. The police are just another narrative device, a way to impose order on disorder. You're already directors. You just didn't know it." Lisa and I looked at each other. We'd been partners for 5 years, solved dozens of cases together. We knew each other's rhythms, could communicate without words, and in that moment, we both knew what we had to do. "We'll need backup," Lisa said. "2 people can't maintain 13 studios." "Others will come," Whitmore assured us. "They always do. Los Angeles calls to those who understand story, who can see the narrative beneath the surface. Writers, directors, actors, even critics. They're all drawn here because they sense what the city really is." "And you?" I asked. "What happens to you?" For the first time since we'd met him, William Whitmore looked genuinely peaceful. "I finally get to stop. 100 years of editing, of maintaining the boundary, of keeping the stories contained. I'm tired, Detective. I want to rest. to become just another part of the footage, another character in the infinite movie of Los Angeles. He stood up from his director's chair and gestured for us to take his place. But it wasn't one chair anymore. It was two, side by side, in front of an editing bay that looked like it was made from every editing system ever created, from Moviolas to Avid to technologies that didn't exist yet. Lisa sat down first, her hands hovering over the controls. The moment she touched them, I saw her change. Not physically, but something in her eyes. She could see it all now. Every story being told in Los Angeles, every narrative thread, every plot point. The knowledge should have been overwhelming, but Lisa had always been good at seeing patterns, making connections. She adapted to it like she'd been born for it. I sat down beside her and immediately understood what Whitmore meant. I could feel the city's pulse, but it wasn't a heartbeat. It was a frame rate. 24 frames per second. The rhythm of cinema. The speed at which still images become motion. And in between those frames, in those tiny gaps, entire worlds existed. I could see every crime happening in Los Angeles, but also every crime that had been filmed, every crime that had been written, every crime that had been imagined. They were all equally real, all equally false, all part of the same massive narrative. My job, our job, was to keep them separate enough that people could function, but connected enough that the city maintained its identity as the Dream Factory. The other studios, I said, understanding flooding through me. We need to rebuild them, the 11 we haven't found. They're already there, Whitmore said, his voice fading as he began to disperse. They've always been there, in the spaces between frames. You just need to staff them, find the right editors for each one, people who understand their particular type of story. He was becoming translucent now, his multiple selves separating and drifting apart like smoke. One last gift, he said, and pointed to the screen. It showed a list of names and locations, people throughout Los Angeles who had the potential to become editors. A horror writer in Echo Park who could manage the dark stories. A rom-com director in Manhattan Beach who could handle the love stories. A documentary filmmaker in Boyle Heights who could maintain the border between fiction and non-fiction. Find them, Whitmore said, now barely a whisper. Train them. Save the city from itself. And then he was gone, dispersed into the infinite footage of Los Angeles, finally free from his century-long vigil. Lisa and I sat in our chairs, hands on the controls, and began our work. On the screen, we could see the chaos starting to stabilize. The helicopter pilot stopped speaking in title cards. The 405 freeway settled into a single timeline. Buildings stopped shifting between decades. But it was delicate work. Every edit we made rippled through reality. Cutting one scene too short could end someone's life prematurely. Extending another could trap someone in an endless loop. We had to be careful, precise, artistic. We need to establish rules, Lisa said, her fingers dancing over controls that existed in multiple dimensions. Principles for how we edit. No changing the past, I suggested. What's been filmed is filmed. But we can influence how it's remembered. Memory is just another form of editing. No creating people from nothing. Every character needs to be based on someone real. But we can influence casting. Who plays which role in the civic narrative? We worked through the night that existed outside of time, establishing our system. The 13 studios would each handle different genres, different aspects of the Los Angeles story. We'd find editors for each one, people who understood those particular narratives. Together, we'd maintain the boundary between fiction and reality, keeping them separate enough to prevent chaos, but close enough to preserve the magic that made Los Angeles what it was. As dawn broke over the city, or one version of dawn in one version of the city, our phones rang simultaneously. It was Captain Martinez. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded. "You've been missing for 3 days." 3 days. It had felt like hours and years simultaneously. "Working a case," I said. "It's complicated." "Well, uncomplicate it and get back here. We've got situations across the city. People are reporting strange things. Reality glitches, they're calling them. Buildings that are there one moment and gone the next. People aging and getting younger. Films being shot with no crews." "We're on it," Lisa said. "We've got it under control." And we did. From our positions in the final screening room, which existed everywhere and nowhere in Los Angeles, we could see it all. Every crime, every story, every dream and nightmare. We could edit them, shape them, keep them from spiraling out of control. But we could also still be cops. That was the brilliance of the system. We existed in multiple states simultaneously, detectives on the street and editors of reality. During the day, we investigated crimes, solved cases, did our normal jobs. But we did it knowing that we were also crafting those investigations into coherent narratives, ensuring they had satisfying resolutions. Over the next months, we recruited the other editors. The horror writer from Echo Park took over Studio 8, managing the dark underbelly of LA's stories. The rom-com director got Studio 5, keeping the city's love stories from becoming either too saccharine or too tragic. One by one, the 13 studios were staffed, the system rebuilt. But it was different from Whitmore's version. We weren't trying to control the narrative. We were trying to democratize it. Every person in Los Angeles became both audience and actor, both writer and character. The city became a collaborative story, millions of people contributing to the plot. The streaming services evolved too. Netflix, Amazon, Apple, they became interfaces between the public and the narrative infrastructure. People could literally stream their lives, edit their own stories, become the protagonists of their own films. But within limits, within the structure we maintained to prevent chaos. There were still problems. People who saw too much, who realized what the city really was. Some went mad. Others tried to exploit it, to hack reality like it was just another computer system. We dealt with them as they came, sometimes as cops, sometimes as editors, sometimes as both. Jennifer Park, the Disney Plus executive who'd been our only surviving witness, eventually recovered. But she was changed. She could see the edits, the cuts between scenes. She became our liaison with the entertainment industry, helping them understand their true role without breaking their minds. The official story never changed. Los Angeles remained just a city, the entertainment industry just a business, the LAPD just a police force. But underneath, in the spaces between frames, the real work continued. 13 studios maintaining 13 aspects of the civic narrative. Hundreds of editors keeping millions of stories from colliding catastrophically. And Lisa and me in the final screening room, overseeing it all. We age and don't age, exist and don't exist, are fictional and real. We solve crimes that happened, that didn't happen, that might happen. We edit reality with the same casual precision we once used to fill out paperwork. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. If we should have let Los Angeles collapse into narrative chaos, become what it always wanted to be, pure story, unfiltered by reality. But then I see a family watching a movie together, not knowing that they're also in a movie. I see a struggling actor get their break, not knowing that we edited the narrative to give them that opportunity. I see the city functioning, dreaming, creating, and I know we made the right choice. Los Angeles is still the dream factory. It still feeds on hopes and ambitions, still transforms people into characters, still blurs the line between fiction and reality. But now it does it with editors, with structure, with purpose. The show must go on. It always has. It always will. And from our seats in the final screening room, Lisa and I make sure it goes on correctly, frame by frame, scene by scene, story by story. We are the directors of the Los Angeles narrative, and the film is far from over. End recording. This file was found on a computer in the LAPD Police Administration building. The computer was not connected to any network, had no power source, and according to IT, shouldn't have been functional. Detective Ray Vasquez and Detective Lisa Chen are real LAPD officers with exemplary records. When asked about this document, they claim no knowledge of it. However, since its discovery, reported reality glitches in Los Angeles have decreased by 78%. The LAPD has no official comment on this correlation. The 13 major entertainment companies in Los Angeles have all recently created new positions: narrative consistency specialists. The job descriptions are classified. If you experience a reality glitch in Los Angeles, do not be alarmed. The editors are aware and are working to resolve the continuity error. The show must go on. It always does in Los Angeles.